Okay, so I am delighted, as I said on LinkedIn, to be kicking off today's super exciting event and webinar, which has been something I've been looking forward to for an awfully long time. There are lots of people still joining this webinar, and I know lots of people also reaching out to say they're definitely looking forward to watching the recording in true event style. So welcome to all of you. It is a fascinating topic and one I'm thrilled to get into today. So I hope you're all ready to leverage AI in your loyalty strategy. I'm guessing many of you are already thinking about this, perhaps testing different ideas. And the fact that you're here to learn today, you must be totally, I suppose, as excited as we are. So to kick us off, if anybody doesn't know me, my name is Paula Thomas, and I am the founder and CEO of Let's Talk Loyalty and Loyalty TV. Today, I'm joined by Collinson's Bhavesh Vaghela and Daniel Cantorna, his formal name, who are our AI experts for the session. So together, we're going to dive into AI's applications, the benefits, and of course, some of the risks for loyalty leaders. And most importantly, it is an opportunity for you to ask them questions on this exciting and I think absolutely critical topic. Now, before I share their credentials and get into the conversation, we firstly have a couple of housekeeping points. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Pooja Venugopal, who is the content and community manager for Let's Talk Loyalty, to cover off those basic starting points with you, please.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to see you all here. And thank you for joining today's webinar. So just before we get into the session, I thought I'll just share a few points. So the first one being, as you can see, we are recording this session. So if you're not keen on being seen, you can remain off camera. The second one being, if you have any question at any time, you can simply add them to the chat box. Or if you're familiar with Zoom, you can just use the hand raise symbol and I will come to you. We will make sure to do our best to get to as many as possible or follow up afterwards. The third and the most important one, we'll be sharing your details with Collinson. So if you're not comfortable with your email address or anything that's being shared, you can just drop me a private message. So over to you, Paula, and enjoy the session today.
Brilliant, brilliant. I love having you involved, Pooja. So thank you for your support. So now let me introduce our speakers to you. For me, one of the key, I suppose, enjoyable factors about webinars like this is the opportunity, I suppose, to connect our community together. So to kick off, we'll make sure that Pooja adds our two speakers' LinkedIn profiles in the chat box, so you can directly connect with them. And any of you who are also feeling sociable, please also do type in the chat box where you're joining us from today. And if you're brave enough to add your LinkedIn profile, please do that as well. We'd love to make sure that everybody is linked in to everybody else. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Dan Cantorna, who is Collinson's Vice President of Product Growth and Innovation for their EMEA team. Dan is a global leader in loyalty, benefits, and traveler experiences with over 15 years in consulting, product development, system integration, automation, and gamification. Welcome, Dan. You joined us on Let's Talk Loyalty a couple of years ago, so I'm delighted to have you back today.
Hi, Paula. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have. It's a long overdue conversation. I think you're also the style guru here today as well. Loving the threads. So great stuff. Secondly, Bhavesh Vaghela is Collinson's Senior Vice President of B2B Product Technology and Innovation with over 2 decades of experience in digital transformation. Bhavesh is also currently pursuing an executive MBA focusing on AI's impact on enterprise. So again, his insights are up to the minute and reflect both the academic rigor, I guess, as well as the corporate reality. So welcome, Bhavesh.
Thank you, Paula. Excited to be here.
Great stuff. Yes, and you told us off air that you've also even been on Sky News with 11 million people once before. So I'm totally in awe. So that's amazing. Great stuff. Cool. Right. So listen, to kick off the conversation, I think what most loyalty managers in our audience are most keen, I suppose, to understand is the best use cases for AI in loyalty. In preparation for today, you guys outlined, I think, 8 or 9 different areas that loyalty managers can focus on. But I'm guessing you both have a favorite. So, Dan, I'm going to come to you first. Will you just share with the audience what is your favorite use case for AI in loyalty?
Sure, thanks. So my favorite use case is one that's been close to my heart for a number of years, and that is personalization. And as we're sort of getting into the next wave and frontier of AI usage, it's about hyper personalization. And I think this is a evolving journey that we've been on from a loyalty perspective for a number of years. We just sort of have now reached the next frontier of what that looks like in terms of what is the content that we can create, what is it that we can put in front of our consumers, how much context can we derive from them and then present back. So for me, it's really exciting in terms of, you know, the ability for us to put the right messages in front of the right consumers at the right time with the right context is only getting better and better and better, to the point where we're now starting to brush up against the edges of, you know, human interaction versus machine interaction. And for me, that's interesting because it allows us to deliver that high touch at scale. So for me, that's a really exciting frontier. Of course, it's one that I love. So that was always going to be my answer.
It totally was, Dan. I'm not at all surprised to hear that from you. And I think as loyalty professionals, we have been talking about it for a long time. But as you said, it's finally coming to fruition. And I think there's a lot of people starting to believe that it's possible. And I think as consumers as well, we're very tuned into what it looks like when we experience it. And it really makes a difference. So personalization at scale is definitely something that AI can excel in. So Bhavesh, what would you look to?
It's a really good question. So when I look at use cases and my favorite use case, I then also start thinking about which one's going to give me a structural advantage and can't be copied. And then if you look at kind of use cases, we've often jumped to the kind of the end customer use case. So I split them out into two. So you've got internal use cases, which you'd use in terms of construction of your value chain, let's say, and you have external use cases, and one of them external use cases is hyper personalization, as Dan talked about. So for me, when I look at loyalty and how we apply loyalty, and then the unlocks we're getting through technology, through data, it's very important that we keep and safeguard and prevent nefarious actors from, being able to abuse the loyalty programs, because loyalty programs are going to become more and more valuable. We're going to go from not just having, points or something that drives behavior to be having real hyper personalization, real data for that customer and giving them that hyper personalized experience. So for me, it's fraud detection and prevention. And this is not a new thing. Whenever there is money to be made or there's value, then there's going to be nefarious actors that go after that app, that product, to be able to try and take away that value or abuse that value. So for me, it's fraud detection and prevention. And I always think of this as the strong front door. So historically, you have a very strong front door to your product, but then everything inside is very open. And with the power of AI, power of machine learning, power of Gen AI, you're able to have a strong front door, but also have panic rooms or other doors that are very strong. So you can then really lock down some of the data, some of the privacy, and some of the value that loyalty will be able to unlock through using machine learning, Gen AI to detect anomalies, to make sure that it's the real person behind the glass. These sort of things become a real fascinating use case, and as we see loyalty becoming more and more prevalent, especially with unlocking through AI, we also need to make sure we secure the front door and we secure the house of loyalty, to prevent you don't want to be on the news for
Yeah.
leaking
Yeah.
your loyalty program to the
Yeah.
world, or nefarious actors using that for monetary gain.
Great. Yeah. Now, thank you for that, Bhavesh. I do think it's important. And I know today we definitely want to make sure that we cover off that balanced view of AI with all the excitement, all the hype, all the opportunity. And there is also risk coming through. So I think, as you said, fraud detection, fraud prevention, it's actually something we're about to do a podcast on. I know Amanda's with us here today. So we're looking forward to talking about that topic actually for the first time. And you're right, the AI power really puts that on steroids. So thank you for sharing that. I reflected on it myself actually as well in preparation for today in terms of, I suppose, just with my consumer hat on. So for me, the place that I see AI coming through most obviously is with the use of chatbots. And I actually haven't seen it within a loyalty program, I have to say. So this is more, I suppose, general consumer behavior, perhaps in a banking context. But for me, the use of AI chatbots is still, I suppose, more disappointing than a delightful. And I hope that that gets sorted very quickly, because there's obviously huge potential value there. But given that customer service is such an important use case for most of the loyalty managers joining us today, would you mind maybe just, Bhavesh, first and foremost, would you just comment on how are you seeing the kind of virtual assistants and powered chatbots performing in loyalty programs at this stage?
So I think it's at that kind of early cusp of, stress testing how it can be used, especially in customer service. I see from a number of different vendors, such as Google, such as Salesforce, really focusing on how can we add that empathetic element to the customer's interaction with a machine. Customers are very smart, so they'll know that it's a machine versus a human. But again, with natural language processing, being able to infer the intent, what we see more and more of is that the gap between humans and non-humans, let's call them digital agents, is becoming smaller and smaller. So I think this is going to become a very strong use case, where customers or clients are going to be able to use AI or Gen AI to really be able to service their customers and allow them to have that 24 hours always on connection, from service, from information to knowledge to FAQs to actually what's my best next step, and being able to use that customers information. But it comes back to use case. What is the organization trying to achieve? If you think about back to the 90s or maybe early 2000s, offshoring was a thing. Everything was offshored, and then people realized that they'd offshored too much, and then they had to kind of realize that their core competencies were offshored. They lost the magic sparkle, the secret ingredient. So then they had to put a break on that and find that balance. I think the same will be true with Gen AI, especially in the support space. They will push the boundaries, overstep the boundaries, and then they'll need to kind of claw that back and make sure you get that human touch.
Indeed. Yes, yes. And in my own experience, again, I do remember my blood boiling on more than one occasion. And I'm pleased to say that the bank in question did step back and fixed it. I obviously wasn't the only one. So you're absolutely right. Test and learn, which I know we're going to talk a lot more about today, Bhavesh. So Dan, just on this particular topic, because customer service and support is so critical, again, these are our most valuable customers in our loyalty program. How are you seeing the use of the AI chatbots specifically as a use case?
Yeah, I think it's one that a lot of people are investing time, energy, and thought into. And I think this, for me, sort of to echo some of what Bhavesh said, I think it comes down to how much of it is automation and how much of it is augmentation. And I think it's about striking the right balance between the two. If you just have a fully automated bot that can, solve some problems, but then it reaches a point it's going to fall over, that isn't a good customer experience, because your customers are going to eventually hit that point, and then they're going to be very frustrated that they can't go any further. I think a more realistic and effective approach is to go a combination of automation and augmentation. So you can have bots that can pick up so much of your workflow, and they can pick up, a percentage of it. But with, I've been in automation for a long time, and whenever you automate a process, there's always a bit of human capital that is required in any process. So you need to factor that in and think, well, what happens when it reaches that point? And we've kind of been in this cycle now for the sort of the last wave of it, and it still continues, is that you need to there needs to be some human intervention, and it's for businesses to decide at what point you have that human intervention kicking in, and what level of service do you want to provide to your consumers. And what is the balance to strike with the, there are operational efficiencies on one side, there's high touch, better customer service on the other side. as a business, where do you want to land? I think the answer from my perspective is it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Some businesses are sort of pushing it more towards fully automated. Others are saying, no, we don't want that. We're going to stick with manual, but obviously that comes with a cost. So it's about striking the right balance.
Yeah, I love that actually, Dan, because, you know, more and more as we kind of talk about loyalty, obviously there is this whole idea about how do we as brands demonstrate loyalty to our members and to our customers. And I think that is exactly right. You know, there needs to be a very clear decision about how well do we want to service, particularly loyalty program members, where potentially there is the highest value. So absolutely, then once you have that clear decision made, you can support it accordingly with the right amount of tech or humans. So definitely lots to watch in that space.
Absolutely.
So I want to get into now, how do we leverage AI in loyalty programs? And Bhavesh, particularly, I want to talk with you about the framework that I know that you have developed, which I know you're calling a pathway to AI. And I know you've detailed what you believe are the 5 key principles that you believe can support loyalty managers as they think through all of these opportunities, use cases, and risks. So would you talk us through your framework? I'm really excited to hear it. And you're just on mute there, Bhavesh.
There we go. There had to be one. I put $1 in the swear jar. Reminds me back of the COVID days in lockdown where that was my most common term. You're on mute. So apologies for that. So if we think about application of any technology, and we think about, I'm going to do a quick history lesson of AI really, really quickly, just to kind of give some context, and then we can go into the pathways of AI. So when you think about any adoption of technology, there is always these peaks and troughs of disillusion, as they call them, and this will be very true for AI as well. So you know, AI started over 70 years ago with algorithms and mathematical algorithms to solve complex problems, but they were very focused. The technology wasn't there. Then you know, the application wasn't as amazing as people once thought. So then, you know, they call it the AI winters. So we've had two big AI winters in the 70s and 80s, and then the early 2000s. So we went from algorithms to machine learning to neural networks, and now we're at the point of generative AI. And I fundamentally believe that this is the sea change that AI has been waiting for. This is where we move from, you know, if you think about the sea changes we've seen, we had mass computation where everyone had a big desktop in their, you know, people don't use desktops anymore, but they had a big desktop on their desk at home. Then we had the mass connectivity, so everyone is able to connect through some form of device. Started with, you know, the old Nokia phones, if you remember them. But you know, connectivity through Wi-Fi and being able to be mobile and be able to connectivity. And I think we're at the position now of what I call mass cognition. So how do we then use what we've had before and the power of AI and Gen AI specifically, especially large language models, that then allows us to have mass cognition. I can talk about that in later kind of conversation. So then if I think about the pathway to AI, I look at every problem with the scope of a design thinking framework. So design thinking has been around for many years, and it's around really looking at what is the problem you're trying to solve. And what I see from some of my research so far is you get these 3 sorts of personas. You get well, AI isn't going to change the world, so we're not going to do anything about it. Fine. We get we must use AI. Why? Well, we must do it because everyone else is doing it, right? It's cool,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you get the last one, which is the one that I think people should adopt to, is to say that there is an acknowledgement that there's this technology and this application that's going to fundamentally shift the way that loyalty works, the world works, essentially. How do we make sure that we're able to build on that and be able to use that to be able to deliver the value to the customer? So my first point on pathway to AI is you need to start with the customer. Start thinking about what do you want to use this technology for and what problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And that's really
Perfect.
important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up using technology to solve problems that are not there, and then you get
Yeah.
the disillusion, right? So you got the business case to say, we're going to do all these great things with AI. You launch
Mm,
something, and the field of dreams, you build it, but no one comes, right? So to reference the Kevin Costner's film, you build it and no one comes, right? So
yeah.
you need to make sure it's solving real problems. That's
Hmm.
step one.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, well, a brilliant starting point, absolutely. And again, we're all marketeers on this call, so definitely will be music to everyone's ears. But again, what I often like is just to have that language internally. So if somebody does say, you know, let's use AI, that they can, of course, be like, okay, so which problem would you like to solve? And I suppose keep the business on track. So that's brilliant as step one. So what's the second principle?
And on that, Paula, it's key to ask the metrics we're going to look at. What's the success metrics? You may not know, but it's useful to have some sort of measure of where you are and
Mm,
what you're going to do to move that needle. Is it engagement? Is it revenue? Is it reducing churn? Is it increasing loyalty? Maybe you have a loyalty index. I think Dan will talk about loyalty maturity. Looking at the metrics, it's a thinking exercise. It can be hard, but it's important. Problems
yeah,
you're going to solve, what your
yeah.
metrics that you have now, and how you'd like them to change. And that kind of leads into, the second step is which is thinking enterprise. So if I look at the inflection point of, I was reading a McKinsey paper a few weeks ago as part of my studies. If I look at the inflection point, it's 2002, 2022, not 2002, 2022. And what I mean by inflection point is that's when really large language models and Gen AI and ChatGPT 3.5 was released. And then the applications have started from then. Inflection points for me are one-way doors. The inflection point has happened.
Yeah.
That's we're not going to go back unless something seismic happens and it's Terminator world. We're not going to go back to kind of the old ways of working. So now we know that that's a truth. In my eyes, it's a truth. Then what do we need to do from an enterprise perspective? It's interesting with AI. We've democratized AI with open source models, ChatGPT, Gemini, all these things that external users have started to use. So
Mm,
from an end customer perspective, and there's a few examples, people start using it to write their CVs and write, write poems and write letters and create content, create images. So end customers are already getting used to using this technology. But now
mm,
for point two, we need to think about enterprise and we need to think about how we can use it within enterprise. So Salesforce have a kind of their five fundamental use of AI, but it all focuses on data. So when you think about how we are in enterprise, we need to be able to unify our data.
hmm.
Typically in enterprise, depending on how long the enterprise has been running, you'll have data everywhere. You'll have lots of data. I worked in banking for many, many years. We had lots and lots of data and we didn't know what to do with it or how to connect it all together because it was all distributed everywhere. So you
Yeah.
really need to, if you really want to have a strong use case for using AI and Gen AI within loyalty, is around unifying that data. Once you've unified that data, you can understand any insights, you can understand any hypothesis, you can then use that to be able to understand what you can use AI for to connect the dots. A key thing in that thinking enterprise is around the skills of your
Mm,
organization and that
mm,
organization muscle. Um,
mm.
people who people who will use Gen AI and use AI in loyalty, the truth is you're going to fail more times than you're going to succeed. You will fail. That's just the truth. Everything you do that's pushing the boundaries, there's going to be some failures, there's going to be some learning points. But that's really important to get them failures because that drives that organizational muscle, the organizational learning,
Mm.
understanding the red line of the customer. We talked about boundaries. All that will come from this experimentation. So thinking enterprise is really important, but also how you're skilling your employees to be able to
Yeah.
use AI is
Hmm.
super important. So that's point two is think enterprise, make sure your
Yeah.
data is in a good place, use that
Mm.
data to connect the dots, figure out any discovery and insights, hypothesis, goes back to what's the goal you're trying to achieve, and then making sure that your organization has the skill sets or you've got a pathway to development skill sets. Excuse me. So to be able to leverage that in your enterprise and ultimately to your end customer.
Yeah. And you know what it's reminding me, Bhavesh? It's actually very familiar, and something I think Dan has very close to his heart is, the similarities with, the whole wave of digital transformation that's already kind of happened in so many businesses. I wouldn't be surprised if we do start to see again, maybe a director of AI in lots of businesses, maybe not necessarily within loyalty, but Dan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how ready enterprises may be, what you're kind of hearing from kind of Collinson clients in terms of, all of this, getting ready for what Bhavesh is talking about. Because for me, the skill set, certainly in our business, we're not there yet. Like, we've a lot of awareness, which today is really helping with, but we've a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think my sort of perspective is that mileage will vary depending on the different organizations and the culture within those organizations. It varies significantly. I think that there are some early adopters who are jumping in head first into the pool of AI and adopting many tools, and there are others who are a lot more risk averse. And I think a lot of that comes down to the previous point I made about sort of the human AI balance. I think there's a piece of there's differing cultural perspectives on that in terms of how much is the right amount and how much should we be doing. There are some people that are getting on a bandwagon, I would say, that are just, we should all be using this because everyone else is using it. I think, to Bhavesh's point, it's about striking the right balance, the right value, and then skilling your people to be able to use it in the right context. I think from my perspective, I'm like, well, everyone's doing this, everyone must be doing this. But then on a daily basis, I'll meet people who are like, oh, well, how's it good for me? How's that going to help me with my job? What's the benefit? Isn't that just a techie? So there is a sort of an adoption curve that we're going to need to get through. So I think it's good to be open about that. And I think transparency within your organization is a really critical thing in terms of developing the right communication strategy to your people, as well as externally, to say, this is what we're doing with AI, this is how it applies to you, this is where you can learn, this is how you can upskill.
Amazing. Absolutely. Yes. Well, certainly we're, lifelong learners here, Dan, as you well know. So that's actually why we do our show, is like, because I'm just constantly hungry to learn. So definitely good advice. So that's cool. So Bhavesh, back to your frameworks. So we've had points 1 and 2. What's the third element of the pathway to AI?
So the third one I look at is the strategic focus and focusing on impact. So it's good to go through a discovery, and it's good to start actioning application of AI within the loyalty space, but you need to have a strategic kind of North Star. So defining that North Star of where you want to go to, and guess what? You'll never get there. It's a North Star. It's a
Yeah.
directional, aspirational focus. It's not a destination. And
Yeah.
over time, that direction will change because technology will change, legislation will change, the whole external environment around data privacy and how data can be used will change, customers' expectations will change, everything will change around it. So that may or may not be in your control. So you need to make sure you have that flexible view of the bigger picture. And I think that really helps organizations and galvanize organizations. To Dan's point around culture, if you have a North Star where we're trying to get to, a vision, a mission, and some applications of how you're going to get there, even if they're small baby steps, it really helps galvanize the organization to prevent them thinking, oh, them people who are doing innovation and loyalty are just tinkering around with something that's never going to work. It really helps the organization because as AI becomes pervasive across the organization, it's no longer a technology thing, it's no longer a product thing, it's no longer a loyalty thing, it's the full value chain. It will cover AI, it will cover HR, it will cover people, it will cover every aspect of AI will become, pervasive across the organization. And how do we galvanize the organization? So that strategic focus and impact. So when I talk about impact, it's very much around the use cases that are going to have the highest impact because it's really important as you get that momentum grows. And what you wouldn't want to do is have something that, and it will fail, but you've got to, if you use experimentation approach, you can mitigate some of these things. What you don't want to do is wait, let's say you do 12-month investment for the grand reveal, and then the grand reveal doesn't wash itself in terms of a business case or the outcomes you're looking for. So you really need to think about the strategic focus and what are the key things in terms of outcomes or impact you're looking for. And that would be point three, around making sure you have that plan, and that North Star and direction.
Amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. I think when I first got into loyalty, Bhavesh, there wasn't always that very clear North Star even for the loyalty program. Sometimes there was the sense of our competitors are doing it, so we've got to do it. And I suppose that's, you know, a certain amount of justification that you can't have a lower value proposition. But yeah, the single-minded focus was often missing. So that's excellent. Yeah. So point number three, strategic focus and North Star. And we've all got our direction of travel. So
And
yeah,
if you only copy the competition, you're only going to be as good as the competition. And it's a
totally.
commodity game then, because then it's a
Yeah,
race to the bottom in terms of price. That's all you
totally.
have, right? The only leverage you will have is price. If everyone uses the same technology, the same application of AI, everyone just
Mm,
copies everyone, all you'll end up having is a commodity game. So you really need to think
yeah.
about that North Star and think about the differentiation that you'll be able to
Mm,
provide.
yep.
And your moat needs to continuously, I talked about it before, you continuously invest in your moat to make sure
Yep.
that you have a structural um, competitive advantage, so
Hmm.
that it's not easy for your competition to copy, and then you continuously make sure you're investing in that to open up
Yeah.
to different use cases. To point four then, learn fast and iterate. So we talked about the intellectual or the organization's muscle in learning. Anything you do, first time you do it will be quite hard. You go to the gym, it's quite hard to lift weights, and then you get used to it. It's the same thing in an organization. You release your first Gen AI product for loyalty. You're going to learn huge amounts from legal, from marketing, from every single aspect of the organization. There'll be resistance within the organization. There'll be huge learnings from a data privacy perspective. And the idea for experimentation is, if it's going to take you more than 3 months to run an experiment or start an experiment, that's not an experiment. You're gold plating the solution. So you need to then think about how you run your experiments. And when I talk about experiments, you may have a beta group of customers or early access
Mm,
group of customers who get to see the new loyalty program that you've produced. And really, if they're highly engaged, they'll give you the right feedback and allow you to course correct. Sometimes you'll launch something with all the hope in the world, with all the things I've just talked about, and your metrics won't shift and customers
mm,
may not adopt. But if you continue to learn and empathize with the customers and get that feedback from a customer through either qualitative or quantitative ways and research approach, you really will start driving that value and increasing your moat. So point four is learn fast and iterate.
okay, perfect. And I love the word moat. I always like to pick up on words that are not ones I use in my own everyday vocabulary, but a very useful idea. So perfect, great. So give us the last one, and then I want Dan's perspective, of course, on these 3 points. So Bhavesh, what is your final kind of principle on the
So
pathway to AI?
So my last one is around co-creation, and innovation through co-creation. So when you look at AI, and I've been looking at it very closely for the last 3 to 6 months,
Yeah.
it can be quite a daunting place. Where do you start? What do you do? So really, it's around that co-creation. You don't need to be an expert in large language models. You don't need to be an expert in application. But what you need to be an expert in is, what do you actually want? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And then you
Mm,
look at across your vendors. I have my personal opinion. Having one vendor that's doing everything is quite a dangerous way of doing it, because you end up then only being able to move in the strategic direction of your vendor. So making sure you have that multi-vendor strategy, and being able to then hot swap some of these capabilities out is really important. But ideally, where you want to get to is a co-creation through different vendors, different organizations, and
mm,
you release value through an ecosystem. You don't release value by being the only person that's offering something. So be that data, be that with airlines, be that with different aspects of that ecosystem. By bringing that data together, you can release value. And if you've done any diving in Cairns or anywhere else, an ecosystem only works if all the right environments are there. So you don't want to be too acidic. You want to have friendly interfaces. You want to be
mm,
able to share and co-benefit from anything that you're releasing across all your partners. And if you drive that mentality, not to just be the first to market, but also making sure you have a sustainable way of growing
Mm,
that ecosystem. I think that's
mm,
super important because then that will bring out unconnected data points or
mm.
unconnected, let's say, lifestyle products, but when you connect them together, you get a greater sum of its parts, and that could be a huge different aspect or opportunity space within
Yeah.
loyalty that then we can use. So maybe it's health and travel, or it's finance and travel and health. It could be lots of different things that may not be fully related, but by building out this ecosystem and co-creating with partners and vendors
Mm,
and clients, you're able to solve real problems, solve their problems, and can you continue to get empathy, but also rocket boost some of your use of AI. Don't try and build everything yourself unless you have a bottomless pit of money and you want to do it all yourself. Understand what you want to own, understand where it's best for others. You can always bring it in-house if you need to. So,
yeah.
going fast and getting something there and launched is quicker to get feedback and signal than trying to build it all yourself, doing a grand reveal after 12 to 18 months and you've got it wrong and you've spent millions of pounds trying to do it all yourself. So the last one's
Mm.
all around innovating through co-creation.
Love it. Yeah. You used another word I liked as well, which is daunting, Bhavesh. And I will confess, as a small business, I find it super daunting. I wanted to ask Dan, I'm sure he's the other end of the extreme. I'm sure you're probably embracing it in every possible opportunity, Dan. Anything you can share in terms of actually embracing and testing AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bhavesh has kind of covered most of it. I think the sort of the key things for me is thinking about your sort of experience design and where you're bringing it into the context. So thinking that through and trying to make it user friendly from a customer's perspective. Feedback loops, I think, is the really critical one. So yeah, I think there's a comment in the chat about do we only, most loyalty solutions only provide you an answer at the end of the year. I think there's no reason why those feedback loops cannot be shorter, weekly, monthly, quarterly. I think AI provides us with the ability to do, faster analytics, to do faster content creation, to do more rich and dynamic customer interactions. So there's no reason not to leverage all of those. But as
Yeah.
Vesh's earlier points, focus on the impact, focus where that you're going to gain the most value, but also where your customers are going to gain the most value, because it's easy
Yeah.
to bombard. We can now create infinite content, but creating infinite content isn't going to drive infinite customer value. It's about really being targeted of where you apply it.
Yeah.
And then my last point, which I think we were going to talk about later anyway, is then really thinking about the ethical framework that sits around all of this. And I think that's a big topic that we want to cover off as well.
It's absolutely the next topic, Dan, because there are so many risks associated with this. I know we're going to probably reference a couple of high-profile failures as well, which are obviously amusing when we're not involved. But I suppose for the loyalty managers here to learn today, I think most of us have probably heard the term hallucinations as one of the big risk factors, but would really love to just get a sense, and Dan, if you don't mind commenting first, what are the organizational considerations in terms of the ethics of AI? For me, the simple kind of guidelines I've heard in a different context, again, more like a consumer, is, they just be very clear when AI has been used, and particularly if it's being used, for example, to write a book and published, like you would never want to think that you're writing something that has been perhaps verified by a human unless, it has been verified by a human. So talk to us about ethics, Dan. It's obviously a minefield. What's your advice to the loyalty leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to have an ethical framework in your application. I think you covered the first point around that, is transparency is key. Transparency and trust are kind of like paramount. Beyond that, I think it's then about saying how you're aiming to achieve fairness, and there is some accountability for the use of AI. So if you're going to be using this tool to generate your content or to put things out into the world, then you need to be able to sort of say that, or have some verification steps in between this being machine generated and this hitting consumers. And I think if you're making where the sort of the the bar stands even higher. Is if you're doing any kind of automated decision making, you really need to have thought through, have we tested this for bias? Is this going to be come out with equal results for men and women, or for people of different ethnicities, or for people of different lifestyles? Is it going to be fair in its outcomes? And then having some way for people to provide feedback, and then for you to respond to the fairness of your use of AI. I think a good example. We were recently putting together a loyalty maturity assessment, which we're going to share to the community, and we were working through some T's and C's for legal, and we actually did do some auto generation. So we went off and we said, right, write me a draft of these T's and C's. But then, of course, they have to go to a lawyer for them to be reviewed and ratified before you start putting that stuff into the market. Because I'll come on to this later in our discussion. There have been some really high profile cases where people haven't done that due diligence, and then that results in sort of fairly negative outcomes for a brand or brands who've not done that.
Yeah. And I think you said actually your legal people were actually pretty impressed with the draft, Dan. Is that fair?
They were, yes. So I think our legal team are usually quite used to getting very kind of abstract. We want to do this lovely competition. Here's a picture. Can you give us some T's and C's? So I think from their perspective, it was great that we said, look, we've come up with a draft. Here is exactly what we want, and we just need it checked. And they were like, well, this is great. It's much faster time to market because they haven't got to start from zero or from a PowerPoint slide. So that was great for them, and they were really impressed with the first draft. But of course, they put some tweaks on it to get it perfect.
Of course, exactly. Trust but verify. Very good. And actually, I've just remembered a funny comment I saw when ChatGPT was first kind of launched, and certainly I was first aware of it back, more than a year ago. And they kind of likened it to, getting the intern to design the campaign, but the intern's also drunk. And would you let that go to market? And I thought that was hilarious, because I think we've all been the intern, and we've probably all kind of come to work and worked on stuff that wasn't good enough. So test and learn and test and verify. So that's absolutely right. Bhavesh, again, this ethical question is probably the second most important thing. Again, after a brilliant framework, looking at all the upside, all the hype, all the excitement and opportunity. What's your view on the ethical considerations for using AI and loyalty?
So I think ethics as a whole within AI is going to become the center point of the usage of AI. If we look at when we did automation, it's all about efficiency and getting things done quicker. People are using that same sort of thinking to use AI. As Dan talked about, the best use of AI is that hybrid mesh of large language models, personal information, and that human supervision. I think there's a huge aspect of ethics that is being uncovered, and governments are putting policies in place now, and worlds are putting policies in place around kill switches and making sure that we have the right policies in place for AI. I think for a few things to talk about in terms of ethics, the guardrails and fallback. So we'll talk about some of the failures, but how do you prevent, if we think about intelligent loyalty, if we coin it as a phrase, it's an intelligent loyalty built up of cognitive agents, and we've got all these cognitive agents that are all connected together. So how do we make sure we put the right guardrails in place to prevent the agents from going off track? So how do we prevent the AIs from going off track? And I think there's a lot of thought that is being put into, and a lot of intellectual effort is being put into the guardrails and the policies. But I think the human supervision is absolutely key. The other aspects I always think about in terms of the ethics of AI, we've talked about bias, we've talked about security. I think privacy by design is one that people should always think about. Is where's that data going to get used? Where are customers aware of where that data is going to be used, and making sure that you're only using the data that is needed to train your models to be able to then provide that customer outcome or benefit. And then I think probably the last one to think about, because Dan's covered the other ones, is around probably the last two, the social inclusion of AI. If we only deliver and create loyalty programs or solutions for, if you think about the pyramid, the elite few at the top, you end up socially excluding the large majority of the population. And so making sure that you have that right robust data sets and training and bias mitigations. Guess what? Data is always going to be
Mm.
biased because humans are biased. So you need to make sure that you're never going to get non-biased data, right? So making sure
Yeah.
that you're aware of that data and making sure you have the right model governance is super important. And then the
Mm.
last one is job losses. So there is a potential here that you end up pushing the boundaries of AI to a point where organizations look at it and say, actually, I don't need 20 people here. I can have two very good people and then the right AI. So
Yeah.
really thinking about that because that can have a cyclic impact on society, and making sure that what we do is the right thing for humanity and not just for commercial gains, and having that kind of overarching view in terms of ethics and application of AI is super important.
Yeah, super important actually. And you've directly led actually to my next question, Bhavesh, which is where, the high profile failure, which again is amusing when you're not involved. And it's so much nicer to learn from other people's mistakes. But if anyone hasn't seen it, it was probably with that use case exactly, Bhavesh, where, McDonald's, is looking to or was looking to AI for its voice ordering technology. And there was some viral videos that went out then on TikTok, with examples of like bizarre, like misinterpreted orders with like bacon topped ice cream and somebody getting like hundreds of dollars worth of chicken nuggets. So clearly in that case, it was an AI fail, and no doubt they'll be back. But they've been running that already for 3 years, so definitely ahead of the curve. So just for, I suppose, a lighter, as we come to the end of the session, I do want to get to a couple of questions and answers, of course, and we do have some in the chat box. But just before we go to the Q&A, Dan, I'll come to you first. Have you seen any kind of failures that you think our audience would like to hear about?
I think the most high profile one last year for me was the Avianca trial in the US. I think it was with it was the first sort of usage of ChatGPT by lawyers, and they basically had been trying to sort of prepare for this case, and then ChatGPT had hallucinated and come up with all this precedent and generated these entire case files that they then got, there was no oversight. So they took these cases into court, put them in front of a judge and said, here's all our evidence of why we should win. And then it was found that these would have all been auto-generated by ChatGPT. And then they ended up getting a fine, and they had some severe impact to their court case. So some really high profile usage of ChatGPT in the earlier days, and some
Yeah.
pretty disastrous results as a result of no one checking. So yeah, a high risk strategy, which I wouldn't advise to anybody.
And honestly, you would think, legal people are the ones designed and programmed to look for risk. You'd think they'd be the ones that were, least likely to go and kind of shortcut the system. So, yeah, definitely one to watch out for. Bhavesh, any other high-profile AI failures that you wanted to share?
I had a whole list, Paula, but I'll go with one. So one thing people need to understand about AI is so there's some seminal work by Daniel Kahneman around research of a heuristic problem of AI. What I mean by that is computers don't understand the world as humans do. Doesn't matter
Mm.
what you do, computers will never understand the world as humans do, or not just yet. Maybe one day. And so one that comes to mind is when Microsoft released their Copilot, one of the use cases, and a great problem to solve because I would love something that provided that. I've done some work last month. I don't know where I've put it on my computer. I can ask Copilot, where did I do this last month? And Copilot would go on and find it, or find where that work is. But the application of how they got there was being able to take screenshots regularly of everything you're doing on your computer and storing it locally. Now, what that means is if a nefarious actor was to get access to your computer, they were able to understand everything you did in terms of your timeline on your machine. So, the problem to solve was a very good problem, and I think it's a awesome problem if the computer is being able to help you,
Yeah.
but the application of that was problematic because the security concerns and privacy concerns may or may not have been taken into account. So then Microsoft had to then switch that feature off because people then realize that everything they did on the machine, their banking, everything, there's a regular screenshot that was then being shared or saved on the desk
Yeah.
on locally on the device. If you lost your device and someone picked that up, they would see everything that you've done. They'd see your banking details. Maybe you've saved your passwords. Look, all these things become
Mm.
quite dangerous. So I think one of the aspects of, although the problem and intent was good, the application probably wasn't the right application, that then can lead to them security concerns.
Indeed, yeah. But actually, it's definitely a pain point I have. I'm constantly going, where did I save that file? So
Yeah,
if it could be done securely, I would totally be embracing that. So,
exactly.
yes. So another great example of, find a real pain point, but test and learn to make sure that there's no inherent risks. On that point, actually, I'm just going to go to one of the questions in the chat box that I think Amanda Cromhout did share. And it's on this topic, Bhavesh, as well. And Amanda's basically saying, obviously, given that AI can be used to help with fraud protection, as you talked about at the very beginning as your favorite use case, if we flip that on its head, do you think that actually AI is now potentially being used by criminals to help them be better at loyalty fraud?
Massively. So if you think about, we had, if you think about kind of the fraud cycle, we had humans against humans, then humans against machines, and now we've got machines against machines. And what I mean by that is social engineering fraud, being able to use voice converters or AI to be able to create voice scripts of, your loved ones. There was a recent one where fraudsters were using in a moment of grief when someone's passed away, they were calling the person with the voice of the person who's passed away to be able to, in that moment of need, to be able to then take their life savings. I'm still alive. I've been kidnapped. I need your money. Lots of use cases that you see there. So absolutely everything that has a good, there is always a nefarious or a bad actor that will try and use that for not so good, which then means that you'll always have this cat and mouse chase. Fraud is always going to be like this. There's always going to be this cat and mouse chase. And once that's going and that flywheel is going, that flywheel will just spin quicker and quicker, and then you'll need to just stay ahead by making sure you're employing the right fraud protection
Yeah.
from behavioral biometrics, device profiling, human heuristics, everything else under there to make sure you're talking to a real person than a machine.
Yeah. That's so distressing, Bhavesh. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it really is constantly shocking, in terms of how the bad actors can be really the worst actors. There's also a question here as well, and I don't know whether Dan might be appropriate on this one, from Malesh Reddy. Thank you, Malesh. Is there a way that NFTs can be used to counter the fraud? I guess there's an awful lot in that in terms of, I suppose it's a technology that, again, we've seen has had hype and risk. Is there any application, do you think, of NFTs along with AI to jointly combat these risks?
Yeah, and I think cryptography and NFTs and the ability to uniquely encode smart contracts and all that kind of stuff definitely has its part to play. I think it's a part of an overarching strategy. So as Bhavesh said, it needs to be, I think it's multidisciplinary in terms of how you combat fraud, because it's going to be machines versus machines, humans versus machines, and a combination of the two. So I think in any of these cases, being able to verify that someone is who they say they are can have multiple ways of doing that, and yes, using technologies like NFTs definitely is a piece of the puzzle. I don't think it's the only piece of the puzzle. I think it needs to be multi-step verification.
Yeah.
We're seeing increasingly that security is going that direction.
Indeed. Yep. Again, back to the point about more need for learning and technology expertise. So great answer. So listen, I'm sure there's more questions in the Q&A, and we won't unfortunately get time to deal with them, all of them live on today's call, but I will make sure that we will deal with those by email, and we'll make sure that the Collinson guys do respond on anything that was raised. So I just have our one final question, which amused me that Dan and Bhavesh had a different perspective, one point of disagreement, I guess, in terms of an overall approach on how much AI is too much AI. So what do you think? Bhavesh, I'm going to ask you first. How much is too much? Is it better to have more automation or more kind of human touch and flexibility?
It's an interesting question. Myself and Dan had a really good debate around this. So for me, if I think about first principles, you should start with AI. If you really want to have AI within the core of everything you do, you start with AI. So everything that you look at, you try to look in the market or within your ecosystem to say how AI can help solve that problem. You don't look at how many people I need. You look at what AI tools, capabilities are out there to help accelerate what you need to do. And it's very startup mentality because funding might be very small. You've got time constraints. So for me, you start with AI and then you augment the AI with the humans. So is it too much? Only time will tell. But that's how I would start it with kind of that first principle thinking. Start with AI and then
Yeah.
add the human capital in terms of what needs to be done.
Brilliant. Okay. And Dan, I think you've got the opposite thinking. Tell us. Yeah.
We're gonna meet in the middle, I think, but I'm coming at it from the opposite side. So I think that, particularly in loyalty, the human touch and the high touch that we deliver to our consumers is really important. And I think that, we've evolved sort of collectively as a very social species. And therefore, from my perspective, I think we start with the human perspective and then we work forwards into what pieces of that can we willingly hand off. Like, I used to have to remember all my phone numbers. Now I don't even know my mother's mobile phone number because it's on my phone. It's starting with the human touch of I want to do something, and then how can I make that more automated by using tooling. And so I think we have to strike the right balance, but always human-centric approach. Start from what do the people want, need, demand, and then work forwards to the automation.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I think the most important thing is to make sure everyone has access to you both. So I know Pooja's going to add your LinkedIn profiles there again for any direct kind of one-to-one follow-up questions that might arise. From my perspective, then just a few, I suppose, closing thoughts. We've already mentioned the loyalty maturity assessment that you guys have just launched. So if anybody's interested in that amazing new opportunity from Collinson, with a prize, I think, of up to £25,000 worth of loyalty consultancy advice, we'll make sure to link to that in the follow-up email that we'll send out after this event. I want to say huge thanks to Collinson's Bhavesh Vaghela and Dan Cantorna. Really have enjoyed your insights. I feel like it's been a masterclass in AI for loyalty strategy. And again, it's certainly less daunting now for me. I think it's fair to say we've worked very hard to bring some really great insights to everyone today. So I just want to say from my side, thank you everyone for all of the work that's gone into preparing for today. And thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for being with us. And I want to wish everybody best of luck. And thank you so much from Let's Talk Loyalty.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.